Welcome to today's deep dive. We're really thrilled you're joining us because we have this truly unique document on the table today, and we are going to unpack it from cover to cover.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one.
It really is. So we're looking at this confidential 21-page roadmap, and it's dated March 2026. It's titled the Arizona Space Sector Action Plan, which internally they refer to as Space Rising.
Right, Space Rising.
Yeah, and this was prepared by Arsenal Government and Public Affairs. So our mission today is to decode it. We're going to figure out how a state takes a scattered collection of aerospace assets and just completely transforms them into a unified federal dollar-capturing juggernaut.
And the timing makes this specific roadmap incredibly relevant for us to unpack right now. I mean, today is June 29, 2026.
Exactly.
And this action plan outlines a highly aggressive 12-month execution window. And that runs strictly from March 2026 to March 2027.
So we're right in it.
Yeah, that means, as you are listening to this, we are sitting exactly in the first quarter of this plan's execution. We essentially have our hands on a real-time playbook for economic dominance in the space sector.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to appreciate the strategy here, you have to really picture what the modern space race actually looks like.
It's not what people think.
No, not at all. Usually the image that pops into your head is like a rocket on a launch pad, right? Fire and smoke billowing out, a countdown ticking away. It feels like this triumph of pure engineering and physics.
Oh, absolutely.
But behind that launch pad, there is this invisible machine that is arguably just as complex as the rocket itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a machine made of federal appropriations, compliance paperwork, zoning laws, political leverage.
Yeah, the unglamorous stuff.
Right, and if that invisible machine is broken or even just, a little misaligned, the rocket never leaves the ground.
Which brings us to the core problem Arizona is facing, at least according to this diagnostic report. We're looking at a state that has all the high-end components for this machine, but they're scattered all over the shop floor. I mean, Arizona has massive, undeniable industrial capacity.
Sure.
It is not a state trying to fake it till they make it. They have serious anchor institutions already entrenched. You've got Northrop Grumman operating a 435,000 square foot satellite manufacturing campus in Gilbert.
Which is huge.
Right, and Raytheon is running massive space systems operations, building missile defense interceptors down in Tucson.
And the talent pool doesn't stop with just the legacy defense contractors either. You have emerging, really high-growth commercial players planting flags, like Rocket Lab recently acquired Juiced and is aggressively expanding its footprint in the state.
Yeah, that was a big move.
And Honeywell Aerospace is deeply embedded there too. So the hardware is undeniably present. The talent is present. Yet the core thesis of this confidential report delivers this rather harsh reality check, which is that Arizona suffers from a complete lack of glue.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that having raw industrial capacity simply isn't enough to win the modern federal space economy.
Right, because of how the funding works.
Exactly. When the federal government, specifically, the Department of Defense, the Space Force, or NASA, looks to distribute funding, they don't just buy isolated satellites from companies operating in a vacuum.
Right.
They invest in comprehensive ecosystems. They want to invest in states that present a unified, heavily coordinated front. The federal government really needs to know that the research universities, the local suppliers, and the prime contractors are all, singing from the same sheet music.
And this roadmap points out that Arizona has been operating like an orchestra without a conductor.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like every prime contractor is lobbying Washington independently, asking for their own specific earmarks. And the state's massive research universities are treating each other as rivals.
Yeah, competing for the same grants.
Exactly, competing for the same federal grants instead of pooling their resources for a mega proposal. Meanwhile, the mid-tier companies, the smaller agile guys who actually supply the specialized parts to the big contractors, they're totally missing out on defense contracts because they just don't have the institutional support they need to navigate the federal bureaucracy.
And in the federal appropriations game, that kind of fragmentation is fatal.
Totally fatal.
When a congressional committee sees a state walk through the door with 5 different competing requests from 5 different entities, the committee gets paralyzed.
Yeah, they don't know who to listen to.
Right, so they usually just say no to everyone. And then they give the money to a state like Florida or Texas that came in with a single, highly vetted priority list.
It's like having all the ingredients for a Michelin star meal-like. The absolute best heirloom tomatoes, the finest handmade pasta, the most expensive truffles imported from Italy.
And delicious.
Right. But every chef is cooking a totally different dish in a totally different kitchen across town. And nobody is actually checking the menu to see what the diners want to eat. You have world-class ingredients, but you do not have a restaurant.
That's a perfect analogy.
Hmm.
And the entire purpose of this document is figuring out how to force these brilliant but isolated chefs to finally work together in the same kitchen.
So let's look at the first logical fix proposed in the plan, which is aligning the rulemakers in Washington.
Right, the political side.
Yeah. To build this ecosystem, they need the state's congressional delegation pulling the exact same levers. So the report maps out the political influence of the state and highlights two incredibly critical figures. First, you've got Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. He sits on the Armed Services Committee, and crucially, he's a former NASA astronaut.
Right, which is huge for credibility. And then, looking at the other side of the legislative architecture, you have Republican Representative Juan Ciscomani. He is the only Arizona member sitting on the House Appropriations Committee. And what this report does, and I mean, it really is a masterclass in clinical lobbying strategy, is it completely neutralizes the politics of these two men.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it pays absolutely zero attention to their voting records on other issues, their party affiliations, or their campaign rhetoric. It evaluates them purely as mechanical levers within the federal funding machine.
And we should be clear, we have to look at this totally impartially, too, just as the authors of the report do. So Senator Kelly's placement on the Armed Services Committee means he directly shapes the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which, sets the policy and authorizes the spending limits for the military.
Exactly.
While Representative Ciscomani's placement on the Appropriations Committee means he holds the actual checkbook that funds those policies.
Right. And the strategy dictates stopping this chaotic flow of different companies asking these two lawmakers for different things.
So how do they fix it?
Well, the state must deliver a single, unified, one-page Arizona space priorities brief to the entire delegation. Just 5 specific asks tied to specific legislative vehicles representing the combined consensus of the state's entire aerospace industry.
Just one page.
Yeah, because if you give a lawmaker one clear, highly vetted priority that benefits their entire state, they can actually champion it through the committee process.
So the politicians are reading from the same script, and the checks are, theoretically ready to be written in Washington. But here is where the narrative takes a wild turn.
Yeah, this part surprised me.
Right. Even with the political alignment secured, the report identifies a massive bottleneck preventing local businesses from actually touching that money. The single largest barrier preventing mid-tier Arizona firms, and we're talking innovative companies with like 50 to 500 employees, from winning defense space contracts, isn't their engineering.
No, the hurdle has absolutely nothing to do with physics, propulsion, or material science.
Wait, so you're telling me the biggest obstacle preventing brilliant rocket scientists from securing government contracts isn't the actual rocket science? Well, excuse me. It isn't the rocket science. It's filling out cybersecurity paperwork.
That is the exact diagnostic, yes. Specifically, the roadblock is achieving and proving compliance with a standard known as NIST, SPSP 800-171.
Okay, if I'm listening to this and I'm an engineer, I might know how to build a thruster, but you're going to have to translate that alphabet soup for me. Why is a NIST standard derailing space contracts?
Well, think about the modern defense space sector. Data is just as critical and often more sensitive than the physical hardware itself.
Okay, that makes sense.
If a mid-tier company is building, say, a specialized sensor for a military satellite, the blueprints for that sensor, the material specifications, the performance data, all of that is legally classified as Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. And the Department of Defense and the Space Force will not even let a company look at the initial requirements for a contract unless that company can mathematically and procedurally prove their computer networks are secure enough to hold that CUI.
And imagine a lot of these smaller, incredibly innovative space startups in Arizona don't exactly have massive IT compliance departments sitting around waiting for an audit.
They don't. A 75-person company might have a handful of brilliant engineers who just built a revolutionary optical lens, but the DoD requires them to have segregated servers, strict employee access logs, physical hardware locks, a massive binder called a system security plan.
A whole binder.
Oh yeah, a massive one, just to prove they can survive a nation-state hacking attempt. So these companies are failing the cyber audit before they can even submit a proposal for the hardware. They are functionally locked out of the market.
Wow. But the roadmap proposes a brilliantly practical fix for this, right? They aren't asking the companies to just figure it out alone. They proposed the state fund a 90-day defense space compliance sprint. And for an estimated cost of, I think it was about $150,000 to $300,000, the state brings in specialized cybersecurity consultants to help 10 to 15 of these high-potential mid-tier companies build their evidence packages.
Exactly.
So the consultants help them draft the security plans, calculate their scores, and basically get them fully certified to handle that CUI.
And looking at the return on investment, it's staggering. I
Yeah.
mean, a couple $100,000 in state funds pays for the bureaucratic heavy lifting, and suddenly you unlock millions, potentially tens of millions in defense contracts for those local businesses.
It's a huge return.
It really is. It's clearing a very specific, very tedious, bureaucratic logjam so the raw engineering talent in the state can actually get into the arena and compete.
So we've got the policy aligned in Washington. We've got the cybersecurity paperwork sorted out locally. But, all contracts in the world don't mean anything if you don't have physical infrastructure.
Yeah, you need somewhere to launch from.
Exactly. You need a place to actually launch and land these vehicles. Which brings us to a fascinating geographic challenge the state is facing. It's a literal tale of two spaceports.
Yeah, this situation perfectly illustrates the fragmentation problem manifesting in concrete and steel. Currently, Arizona has two separate, highly active spaceport initiatives moving forward completely independently of one another.
So down in the southern part of the state, you have the city of Sierra Vista heavily pushing for a horizontal reentry spaceport. They secured an anchor tenant, Black Star Orbital, and their vision is to build a facility where reusable space vehicles can return from orbit and land on a runway, much like a traditional airplane.
Right.
Meanwhile, over in the western part of the state, Yuma is aiming for a vertical launch spaceport. They're situated right next to the Yuma Proving Ground, targeting smaller rocket launches and specialized defense testing.
And in a vacuum, both of these are economically viable, smart ideas.
Sure.
But the massive risk highlighted in the roadmap is what happens when they operate independently. If they don't coordinate, they are inevitably going to start lobbying the state legislature for the same limited infrastructure grants.
Oh, that's a problem.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
When they go to Washington or to the Federal Aviation Administration to ask for licensing support, they're going to severely confuse the federal narrative. The feds will look at Arizona and say, wait, which one of these is your priority? We aren't funding both of your pet projects.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The report explicitly tells the state not to force them to merge. Like, they recognize these are structurally and technically different projects.
Right, they serve different purposes.
Yeah. Instead, the strategy is this massive rebranding effort. They want to package them as a single, complementary Arizona spaceport network. So they aren't treating them as two rival airports trying to steal each other's passengers. They're basically rebranding them as the arrival and departure terminals of the state.
And it's an incredibly savvy narrative shift.
Yeah.
If you look at a dominant space state like Florida, they don't just pitch a single launch pad. They market a massive distributed infrastructure network across the Space Coast.
Exactly.
So by officially framing Sierra Vista as the designated reentry site and Yuma as the designated launch site, Arizona suddenly looks like it is building a comprehensive, full life cycle space ecosystem.
And the roadmap actually goes much further than just clever marketing. It proposes a highly specific tactical move to speed up the regulatory nightmare of building a spaceport.
Yeah.
Anyone who follows aerospace knows that the FAA licensing process can take years, and the biggest, most painful bottleneck is always the environmental review, known as the NEPA scoping.
Right, the National Environmental Policy Act.
Right.
It's a notoriously time-consuming, granular process.
I can imagine.
When you build a spaceport, you aren't just pouring a concrete pad. You have to conduct exhaustive studies on the decibel levels of sonic booms over nearby residential communities. You have to analyze the impact of potential highly toxic propellant spills on the local groundwater.
Wow.
You even have to study the flight paths to ensure you aren't disrupting migratory bird patterns.
That is wild.
Yeah, doing that from scratch for one site takes years.
So the report says the state should procure a shared environmental consulting firm to start preliminary NEPA scoping for both Sierra Vista and Yuma simultaneously right now, even before formal applications are submitted to the FAA.
The cleverness of that parallel track strategy is remarkable. Getting ahead of environmental reviews is the open secret to fast-tracking aerospace infrastructure.
Because it saves so much time.
Exactly. By sharing a single consulting firm, the state ensures a consistent methodology across both sites. They save money through economies of scale, and most importantly, they can compress the overall FAA licensing timeline for 6 to 12 months.
Which is huge.
Massive. In the commercial space industry, 12 months is the difference between capturing a market and filing for bankruptcy.
Okay, so the policy is clean, the cyber compliance is handled, the environmental reviews are fast-tracked. But none of this infrastructure matters if you don't have the people to actually do the research and turn the wrenches. So let's look at the human element, the brain trust, and the assembly line.
The brain trust refers to Arizona's university system, which is an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah, it really is.
Arizona State University currently manages over 120 space industry partners and is actively part of the Space Force University Partnership Program. The University of Arizona operates its highly respected Space and National Security Institute, and Northern Arizona University and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University bring massive specialized capabilities to the table.
But the fragmentation problem rears its head yet again here. The report notes these universities are drastically under-leveraged because they aren't presenting themselves to federal agencies as a coordinated system.
Right, back to the orchestra without a conductor.
Exactly. So the proposed fix is forming an informal Arizona Space Research Consortium. The goal is to produce a joint capabilities brief, essentially a comprehensive menu for the Department of Defense showing exactly what research power the entire state can bring to bear collectively, rather than having the schools fight over scraps.
And the report dives much deeper than the PhD level, and this is where it gets highly practical. It focuses intensely on the actual workforce required to physically sustain this industry on the ground.
This part really challenged my assumptions. They talk about leveraging the Future 48 Workforce Accelerator, which is a state partnership with community colleges and major employers like Boeing and Honeywell.
Yeah.
The roadmap insists they need to spin up a space-specific training track immediately. But they aren't asking for more theoretical physicists or orbital mechanics experts. The industry is screaming for satellite assembly, integration, and test technicians, AIT technicians, and they desperately need FAA safety analysts.
These are the people who actually physically build the spacecraft. If you walk onto the floor at Northrop Grumman, you see technicians in full clean room bunny suits.
Right.
They're meticulously routing delicate wire harnesses through a satellite bus. They're operating thermal vacuum chambers that simulate the extreme hot and cold environments of orbital space to test the hardware. It is highly skilled, incredibly precise manufacturing labor.
So what does this all mean for you as a listener? It means the future of the space economy relies heavily on blue-collar space workers. The folks actually operating the torque wrenches on the satellites in Gilbert and Tucson are just as vital to the ecosystem as the people doing the math on the chalkboards.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of capturing federal money, having a quantifiable, reliable workforce pipeline is the ultimate trump card when applying for massive federal grants from the DoD or the National Science Foundation.
Because it shows you can actually do the work.
Precisely. When the government decides where to award a billion-dollar manufacturing contract, they look directly at the local workforce. If a state can point to a dedicated, actively running community college pipeline, specifically producing AIT technicians, that heavily de-risks the investment for the federal government. They know the company they hire will actually have the staff to fulfill the contract.
So all of these ambitious plans, the compliance sprints, the shared environmental consultants, the workforce accelerators, none of this is free.
No, definitely not.
This whole document culminates in a very specific financial ask to the governor's office and the state legislature. They want a space investment package of $3 to $8 million per year.
And that money is entirely designated to be the glue we've been talking about since the beginning.
Just the glue.
Right. It pays for the spaceport feasibility studies, the shared NEPA consulting, the NIST compliance sprint, matching funds for university research grants, and the administrative staffing for the Space Commission itself.
Now, I have to admit, when I first read that number, I was a bit confused. Okay, $3 to $8 million sounds like a lot of money to a regular person. But the report explicitly compares this to competitor states to show the scale of the fight.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective.
It really does. It notes that Florida's Space Florida organization operates with an annual budget of over $20 million. And it points out that New Mexico spent $209 million building Spaceport America. So if I'm looking at this math, Florida is spending 20, New Mexico spent 200. Is Arizona bringing a pocket knife to a laser fight by only asking for $3 to $8 million?
It seems that way, until you evaluate the concept of leverage ratio. And this raises an important question, Reg. Will always dictate a different budget than brute force spending.
How so?
Well, New Mexico had to spend $200 million because they were trying to build a space ecosystem out of the desert from absolute scratch. They had to build the buildings to attract the companies to move there in the first place.
Oh, I see where this is going. Arizona already has the companies.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Arizona doesn't have to build the factory. They already have Northrop Grumman. They already have Raytheon. They already have Rocket Lab. The federal government is already pumping an estimated $6 to $10 billion annually into the state through these prime contractors.
Wow.
Arizona doesn't need to buy the car. They already have the car. They just need to pay for the oil to keep the engine from seizing up.
So that $3 to $8 million isn't trying to match New Mexico dollar for dollar on pouring concrete. It is strategic seed money. It's paying to clear the bureaucratic hurdles, like those cyber audits and the environmental reviews we talked about, so that the billions of dollars already flowing into the state can actually trickle down and reach the local mid-tier companies and the university research labs.
It's an incredibly efficient, highly leveraged use of state taxpayer funds. They are optimizing a massive economic engine that is already running on the floor rather than trying to invent a new one.
And there's a ticking clock on all of this. By September 2026, which is just a few months from where we are sitting right now in the timeline, the newly formed Arizona Space Commission is legally required to publish its first biennial strategic plan.
Right.
And this confidential roadmap is essentially handing them the blueprint for that mandated plan on a silver platter.
It hands them the exact performance metrics, the necessary timelines, the specific state investments required, and the entire federal engagement strategy. It takes a newly launched government commission and instantly transforms it from a political talking shop into a focused execution engine.
Let's pull all this together. We started this deep dive looking at a state with all the right pieces, but no coherent picture. And what this 21-page roadmap reveals is that economic dominance in the modern space sector isn't just about having the coolest technology or the biggest manufacturing campuses.
No, it's not.
It is about meticulous, highly unglamorous coordination.
Mastering compliance red tape, forcing your politicians to stick to a single vetted message, treating competing infrastructure projects as a complementary network, and training the specific blue-collar technicians the industry actually demands. That is how a state captures federal dominance.
So whether you are listening to this as someone managing a corporate team, organizing a local community project, or trying to scale a tech startup, the universal lesson here is clear. Raw talent and massive resources will almost always lose to a highly organized, unified strategy. The chefs might be brilliant, but if they aren't working from the same menu, the restaurant inevitably fails.
It does leave us with one final and perhaps slightly dangerous question to mull over as this industry evolves.
Oh, what stands out to you?
If you look closely at this entire 12-month roadmap, it is heavily, almost exclusively, indexed on capturing federal and defense dollars. It's all about navigating the Space Force, NASA, and the DoD requirements. But as we look toward the 2030s, commercial space companies are increasingly funding their own pure-play commercial missions, totally independent of the government. Does building an entire state ecosystem around strict federal compliance risk making the state too rigid?
Wow. So by perfectly adapting to the government's highly specific rules today, do they lose the agility to catch the purely commercial, fast-moving space boom of tomorrow? That is a fascinating thought to leave on. Maybe the chefs learn how to perfectly cook to the military's exact nutritional specifications, but forget how to invent something entirely new for the open market.
It's a delicate balance and one every major aerospace state is going to have to navigate.
We will definitely have to watch how Arizona walks that tightrope over the next 12 months as this roadmap goes live. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.